participants was supposed to be Mariela Angel Ruiz, who's the director of the, I never get it right, the Albuquerque, somebody tell me. Matt, do you have it? The Albuquerque.
It's the Albuquerque Community Safety Department. So when we say ACS, that's what we're talking about.
ACS Community Safety Department. I put it wrong on the agenda. So our agenda is pretty simple tonight. It's our usual discussion. If Mariela doesn't show up, then we'll just talk to Lieutenant Dietzel. Dietzel.
Dietzel's fine, you're right.
Take your word for it. Lieutenant Dietzel and Bobby about what it is they do and how they serve the community. Before that we start, let me introduce the membership, council members. I'm Rowan Wyman. Can you introduce yourselves, guys?
Edwina Cairo.
I'm Tom O'Keefe.
I'm Dick Wunderbaum.
Jacqueline Polly Ritz.
Then Lieutenant Dietzel, can you describe what it is you do and what your unit, how your unit serves our community?
Sure. So we actually have about 12 detectives right now. And basically what the Albuquerque Police Department Crisis Intervention Unit does, we have two different sides of the house. So we have one side that basically handles all the training and everything related to mental health that Albuquerque Police does. So that includes basic CIT level, the higher level enhanced CIT officers, and then you have the mobile crisis teams. So one side of the house handles all the training and actually houses the mobile crisis teams on the officer side. The other side of the house, so an officer goes to a call where there's some kind of a behavioral health crisis or someone with mental health diagnosis that isn't connected to services at all. The officer would usually recognize that and then send us a referral. And so the main goal of that second side, actually John Gonzalez's side, is to basically try to get that person from the 911 system into services. So the goal is so the police are not involved anymore. And to some extent, it's also for EMS too. We have a lot of people who call regularly for trips to the hospital, sometimes via ambulance, behavioral health issues. And so we cover that too. We also are dipping our toes into substance use disorder. As I'm sure this board has talked about, methamphetamine is a big problem in Albuquerque right now, and it presents itself in a way that kind of reflects behavioral health crisis. A lot of those things look the same. And so we're starting to dip our toes into that a little bit, but nationwide, nobody has that figured out. So that's a quick rundown of kind of what we do, and I'd be happy to answer any questions anybody has if they have them.
Has it changed? Can you talk about some of the changes that it's gone through? Because I mean, I remember when I did the Citizen Police Academy, it was simply the crisis intervention team. And I don't even know the size of the team. I know it started with only 2 way back when. But when did it change from the intervention team to the unit, and how many more staff are there?
Sure. So when the settlement agreement came out, the unit got a lot bigger. So it basically went from essentially a couple detectives and a sergeant to 12 detectives, a sergeant, and a lieutenant. And most recently, we've gone to 12 detectives plus a mobile crisis team, plus 4 more mobile crisis teams, 2 sergeants, and 2 lieutenants. And so that the unit just continues to grow. We also have 2 civilian post workers. So that's the crisis outreach and support team. They're essentially social workers that we utilize to kind of help that linkage to services happen quicker and easier. And it's a non-law enforcement piece that we have in-house. And then we also have 2 master's level clinicians who help us with our calls that are also supervised by a psychiatrist. So APD is one of the few departments in the entire nation that has an on-staff psychiatrist full-time. And he helps kind of provide clinical guidance for the clinicians we have. And he also just kind of helps us stay on track. And he's really great for communicating with the hospitals. It's been something that's been a struggle for us in the past, continues to be a challenge. But Dr. Rosenbaum's amazing for kind of speaking the language at the hospitals.
Thank you.
Can you tell me the makeup of the mobile crisis team?
Sure. So I'm sure Mariela is going to probably talk a little bit more about it because the clinician side of that equation lives in Albuquerque Community Safety Department. But you have an ECIT officer, marked uniform in a marked police car, and then riding with that trained officer is a clinician who's employed by Mariela's shop. And the great thing about the mobile crisis team is it is kind of a big hole that APD had in terms of crisis response. We didn't have a clinical intervention at the time of crisis. Everything was either at follow-up or we'd have to come out to them at a later time or, sometimes hours later. But mobile crisis teams allow us to kind of handle the situation right now as it's happening and actually relieve some field officers who'd be, down that call to go back to dealing with other calls that are coming in. So they kind of take that mental health pressure off the field officers just a little bit. We only have 4 that will expand at some point. It's just a matter of, everything aligning for us to have the clinicians and the officers available. And we're kind of working on that as we go forward.
I might be repeating Jacqueline's question in a way, but how many of the enhanced CIT do you have?
Sure. So we kind of fluctuate between about half the field and a little bit more. I haven't done August numbers yet, obviously, but I think we're at about 203 in the field that are ECIT. And the thing about ECIT is the voluntary program. And I've been trying to keep it that way because you don't want to make this a mandatory, like you have to take this training, because you want to keep the officers who are interested, motivated, and the best that we have that want to do the job to have that certification. Now the CIT class, which is a level below that, is required for everybody. So everyone at APD who's been on for a year or longer has been through that 40-hour class. So when you hear other police departments talk about CIT officers, they're talking about that basic 40-hour class. And then we have 2 levels on top of that, plus the unit detectives to kind of, fill out that response.
And you see yourself working closely with the new department or no?
Yes, I'm actually really, really excited about the ACS kind of coming online. There's a lot of calls that officers go to where you will hear them as they're leaving going, first of all, why were we here? It wasn't a crime. It's not a crime to have a mental illness. It's not a crime to be unhoused. Why are we here? And number 2, they kind of feel helpless. Like, I didn't do anything here. I basically came out here. I kind of stabilized it, I guess, but ultimately long-term, there was no good solution that we offered. And we see that in the data we collect too. Between 50 and 38% of the calls that CIT goes out on, CIT officers go out on, we don't do anything. There's no action required. So either we went out there and we just kind of stabilized it a little bit, band-aided it, but we didn't fix anything. And so when you don't, take an action, either a law enforcement action or mental health transport or anything, you're kind of like, what am I doing here? And that's where I think that the ACS can really shine and help take some of that pressure off the calls that are holding out there.
I can't call you Bobby. I have to call you Mr. Ehrig. I do apologize, but Mr. Ehrig, can you tell first about your organization and how it fits? I asked you to come tonight because veterans are a readily identifiable group among those experiencing homelessness. I don't know the numbers, but I would assume it's a fairly significant amount of veterans among that community. And so could you clarify that and also describe the services you offer?
Sure. First, I'd like to thank all the officers on the call because I spent 17 years in law enforcement for the military, and I actually went through civilian CIT, and it was probably one of the best trainings I actually ever had that I actually enjoyed as well. So thank you all for that. So yeah, my name is Bobby Ehrig. I'm the CEO of the Veterans Integration Center, also known as the VIC. I'm also a disabled vet of the Iraq War, so I spent some time in the military. So basically, the VIC itself is the largest provider of homeless veteran services in the state. We are based in Albuquerque, but our services are available anywhere throughout New Mexico. And we are the only one whose primary and only mission is to end veteran homelessness. From our numbers, and I will tell you, my data is basically extrapolated from multiple sources since our state does a very poor job of accurately documenting homeless overall, but also veterans in the homeless population. Throughout the state, there's an estimated about 3,400 homeless or at-risk homeless veterans at any given day. On a regular annual basis, we help about 450 of those, obviously the majority coming from the Albuquerque area, wanting to actually end the homeless cycle and kind of get off the streets and get their life back on track. We do provide a comprehensive array of services, I would say. Unlike some of the other organizations, because we are only supporting veterans and their families, we try and provide as many resources, services, and supports that we can to ensure that the veteran and their family will not end up in homelessness again. It's a challenge sometimes because a lot of this problems, as I'm sure everyone on the call knows, when it comes to the, a homeless individual, is very dynamic and has a lot of variables. But I think that, as long as there's as many folks that are on this call trying to fight that effort, I think it's something that can actually be achieved as we keep on plugging away at it. I will also tell you that we work very close with the VA. The VA is actually one of the largest funders of homeless veteran programs throughout the entire nation. A lot of folks don't realize that. Also is that a lot of the homeless veterans that we serve don't necessarily qualify for VA healthcare services. A lot of folks who maybe never served in the military tend to think that because it's the VA and you served in your country that you actually get benefits. And it's actually not true. Serving in the military is different than most jobs, but generally speaking, everybody who serves doesn't necessarily qualify for any kind of benefit after they get out of the military, except for usually educational benefits. You still have to qualify. There are some qualification differences as well as eligibility standards. But what we try and do at the VIC is also provide services that meet gaps. So if you think about general homelessness and you talk about mental health, substance use, law enforcement bringing in intervention teams rather than always a law enforcement perspective and those things, you realize that there's a lot of things that just are lacking. When we do this for our veterans, we try and build new programs that actually fill those gaps. And again, specific to veterans and their families, but we want to make sure that we're kind of a contributing member of the community rather than just a social service organization out there trying to do something day to day. We want to do long-term solutions. And I think that's probably why our success rate, which is about 80% in 2020, and basically that's measured, it's called a housing stability rate. That's measured up to 1 year after they graduate from our programs. So 1 year, we track them for up to a year. And the national average for housing stability is about 67%. So I like to point that out because all the things that everybody says New Mexico does terribly, one thing that we do is try and take care of our homeless veterans and make sure that the solutions that we do stick.
Do you see do you see your organization or the people that you've served as part of your organization, do you see them also using this city department? And you might.
Yes, ma'am. So, we are not the be all do all solution for homelessness when it comes to veteran families. We rely heavily on community services already established and resources in place. Very specifically, for example, let's say we have a veteran that doesn't qualify for VA services. Well, then we obviously have to find resources for them to engage to ensure, if it is a mental health issue, that they have the appropriate counseling and support. So we work with many community agencies, about 100 organizations throughout the state. We work actively, with our local police substations who are around our offices, because we have a lot of situations, not necessarily with our homeless vets, but we like to be good stewards of the community. So we work with them on a regular basis, because most of our staff are trained, not necessarily in CIT, but they do have other intervention strategies and suicide prevention strategies that we tend to end up supporting the general community for. What we try and do is focus our services on the housing issue. So if you think about some homeless person on a street corner panhandling anywhere in the city, and you think, well, what does it really take to get them to stop panhandling? One of the largest things that most of us have to struggle with each day is either paying rent or mortgage. So that's usually about 60% of what we pay throughout our lives. And what we try and do is use the housing as a starting point to enable or empower our veterans and their families to actually deal with the struggles that they have had that have led them home. Now, I will tell you, mental health and substance use is obviously a significant issue, but there are a lot of experiences that they've gone through, whether it be post-traumatic stress, combat or non-combat, that they just never really got that true transition from military service to the civilian community. And that's where our staff come in. We have about 91% of our staff, and we only have 26 folks who are actually veterans or family members of self. And that experience, much like people who work in crisis intervention, their experience of training, but also life experience, helps us to ensure that our veterans and their families are able to actually have the best opportunities that they have in order to be successful. I will not say that they are all successful, because as I mentioned, about 20% of them fall into the recidivism rate of homelessness. But we try our hardest to ensure that everything is addressed, something as simple as learning how to do laundry again, to as complex as dealing with childhood trauma or sexual abuse.
I'm glad you brought up mental illness, because as you know, the CASA, the Court Approved Settlement Agreement, is around an individual who is psychiatrically impaired, who got shot and died as a result of his wounds, and that was the impetus that started the CASA. I guess I'm curious, and I don't know if this is a figure that you can actually come up with, is how many veterans maybe in your opinion, or maybe how many you serve, how many do you come across that have a significant mental illness?
So I think that really depends on what you call significant mental illness. I myself, I am a CEO. I do have 17 years of active duty time. I've gone through 3 conflicts. I have PTSD. It's something that I had to address for the first 5 years after I got out of the military, all kinds of therapy modalities, as well as share my story. But I think if you just say generally how many of them have mental illness, I cannot recall a single homeless individual, obviously specifically veterans, that did not have some form of trauma from being homeless. That's one thing I think a lot of times we forget, because we have what I would consider stable lives and stable support systems, is that every person who's ever been homeless that we've ever helped, none of them have ever been okay. None of them have never not needed either one-on-one individual counseling or support group counseling. A lot of times with veterans, it's a little different, because they do respond better to group therapies rather than just individual therapies, which is a little bit different a lot of times than the general homeless population. The other benefit is that about 71% of the veterans we serve actually are either eligible or become eligible for VA healthcare. That is a significant difference because that doesn't stop at one incident or one occurrence or is a 6-month temporary program. It allows them a lifetime, of supports. And we also encourage all our clients that we serve, even if they're not in our program anymore, to come back if they are struggling or if they're having an issue or if they're having a crisis. And all our staff are very cognizant of that fact as we deal with them every day.
I guess I meant the more significant, the people who have high level mental psychiatric disabilities, the ones who are neither safe for themselves or others.
I would say if you're talking about serious mental illness or SMI or dual diagnosis, that would be about 12% of the veterans that we serve. Many of the veterans that have SMI that are not treated generally are those ones on the streets that are ones who would tell you they prefer to be homeless. But it is a rather low number compared to, let's say, somebody who's suffering from trauma that maybe makes them manic at times, but also makes them seem normal most of the time.
I'm very happy to learn about your program because nationwide, the statistics about providing homes for especially veterans before tackling mental health or substance abuse issues is number one. And I'm impressed with your 80% rate. That's significant. So thank you for letting us know about your program.
Yes, ma'am. I think the biggest thing, and law enforcement tends to see this more than most, is that when you're dealing with homeless or indigent individuals, one single service is not going to cut it. Seeing law enforcement from around the world and how other cultures deal with people who are homeless or suffer mental illness, the one thing we tend not to do in the United States is that you have to take a collective approach to the problem. Providing crisis intervention and then also getting them to counseling is not enough because you're not dealing with just the root problem of what they're dealing with, right? Some of these folks have been on the streets for years. Some of them have now created their own unorthodox culture, but there isn't actually a culture on the streets, as well as a culture they've ingrained in their mind of how they have to live now. And I think that's one of the things when we're trying to deal with it, especially in Albuquerque, is that it's going to take more than like a single type service or resource to be able to solve that problem.
In light of that, do you have someplace you can refer to, or do you have community support services or wraparound services?
Yes, ma'am. So all our programs have what's considered wraparound services. Our case managers address every issue that an individual has. If we do not provide that service or we don't have a set structured service for that, we will source other community partners to help us with that. For example, before COVID, I did not have a licensed clinician on staff. Most of my staff were case managers and peer support. Because of the lack of mental health services, once COVID locked everything down, we actually had one of our case managers become a clinician, and we're now providing in-house mental health counseling. We're also providing that via telehealth to veterans, which a lot of them are in the highly rural areas, and also those who maybe are uncomfortable with going to an institutionalized setting to obtain those services. But we do rely on the community to help us, solve the problem. One of the things that we do as part of our wraparound services, we actually fully furnish a veteran family's new home. So let's say they're moving into an apartment for the first time again through our program. We use donations from the community to fully furnish their home. Obviously, it's not brand new, and it's not, a luxury apartment, but we want to remove all possibilities of trauma or stress or anxiety so that they can actually have the ability to function independently without all the stressors. If you think about the first apartment any of us ever got, I remember it cost me like $3,500 just to get basic furniture. And, we try and remove those barriers when we are addressing again, the root causes of homelessness, whether it be the mental illness, substance use, or even, you know, just a lack of education or social upbringing.
Okay, so we're going to turn to Mariela, who's vanished, but we're going to turn to Mariela. There you are. And then we're going to go over the questions that we're seeing in the chat, because we'd like to sort of have kind of, that was an introductory thing, but, and the questions can come later. So we did get some fascinating answers, and thank you, Mr. Ehrig, you really covered it. Miss Ruiz-Angel. Okay.
Good evening, everybody. So I have a little bit of a PowerPoint, if that's okay to share. I don't know if I need to get access.
Kelly, can you do that?
He did, we're good. This has been like our ever evolving PowerPoint that I think many people have seen, and it has just consistently grown and changed. Again, my name is Mariela Ruiz. Now I have a team, which I think when I first met with you, I was solo playing it. So my deputies, Jasmine Desiderio and D'Albert Hall, I have the night off, so you'll just hear from me this evening. So we're the Community Safety Department, the third branch to public safety. So when police and fire are not the appropriate response for mental and behavioral health calls, ACS will be able to be dispatched out. Again, the intent of the cabinet level department is to do outreach, follow up, and respond to 911 calls on inebriation, homelessness, addiction, and many other mental health calls. We have started to actually hire. We've hired our first cohort of community safety responders. What we have they're called behavioral health responders specifically. And these are what we anticipated: social workers, housing and homelessness specialists, diversion program experts. They are literally all these people. And I'm so happy to announce that we've got an amazing cohort who's about to be trained in August. Our goals have not changed, you know, and as we've evolved, we've had to kind of be flexible, but it really comes down to sending the right resource to 911. We also want to have had to really think about how are we reducing communities that have been over-policed in the past, and then how are we destigmatizing and decriminalizing mental and behavioral health. And then lastly, which, you know, I think Bobby really said it, was how are we really working together to improve access to the services, right? In his case, they're very specific about their population that they serve. So then how do we really work together, right? How do Matt and I continue to streamline our processes so that we can continue to improve access to those services, right? So versus having those duplication, how do we really streamline that and make it easy for our community to truly obtain those services? As many of you know, we were at the time early on, we worked on a community engagement event where many of you I got to meet. It was done virtually as we were in the middle of the pandemic. Engagement report came out of that. So if you haven't had a chance to read it, it really has been a guiding report for us that really uplifted community voices. So you can do a very easy Google search, and I'll also put it in the link. It's just, if you put in ACS Community Engagement Report, you'll have the entire report there. You can read through it. But that report has been really important because although we would love to meet with community every single day while we're building this out, it's not always possible. And so having this report has really helped us when we're in this kind of a jam where we're like, do we do this or do we do this? And we go back to that report and we're like, this is really what community wants. And so we have to kind of really find that good middle, because that was the whole purpose of the engagement, is so that we can understand what is community needing, what do they want, not what we think they need. We have a really great planning committee, and I left this in there not so that you could necessarily see, but we have this planning committee that has been, we asked very specific individuals to be a part of, and now we're in this place now where we're growing, and we'd like to grow the planning committee. And we don't even know if we'll call it planning committee. I think it might be just a really great ACS stakeholder committee. So we're looking for new participants, and so that we can make this more public and really allow for greater participation and greater input from other stakeholders across the city. We didn't have the capacity early on, but we're getting there. So that'll be opening up, and I'm happy to send an invite so that you guys can join us for our next monthly meeting. This is our newest org chart. So it's definitely grown from our previous years, and I probably really should put like a before and after so we can keep track. But as you can see here, we have definitely grown with myself, the deputy directors that we have, the different divisions that we've created, and the positions that we've posted and now also have been hiring for. So also wanting to put out there that we are still looking for a couple internal positions. So if you know people who are interested in an accountant position or data or policy analyst, please let me know, because we've got some positions available. Additionally, again, we filled our first cohort positions, and we're in the process of hiring our second cohort positions. Now, again, these are just our ACS behavioral health responders. And then we'll also be hiring for our emergency community responders, and I'll give you some more details on what each of them is about. But yeah, as you can see, we are growing into this really thriving department. So here's kind of the gist of our responders, right? It wasn't just enough to have the behavioral health responders, right? Which are going to be great. And it's not enough for us to just have the mobile crisis team, right? Just like Matt said, the mobile crisis team, although logistically works in a co-response model with police, we hubbed them under ACS because of the support and because of the training aspects that they'll be able to have access to on a daily schedule, right? It's not like we have to try to schedule something specific for them. It's their hub, and we can really help them with the vicarious trauma that they're dealing with, and we can help them with the reflection of some of these issues. So we have a clinical supervisor who's been fantastic with them. We also felt that having a type of responder, which leads us to our emergency community responder, was important. This is very different than our behavioral health responder. This type of responder doesn't necessarily need to have a mental or behavioral health background. They need to be able to have the empathy and some of the safety skills, as well as the compassion for those who might be, right, those down and out calls that we see where people have, been inebriated and they're trying to get home and they're walking in and out of traffic. How do we start to pull some of those folks out of that situation? We're not going to be able to do true intervention at that moment because cognitively they're not able to make decisions for themselves, but we do need to get them to a safe space. And so because of that, we really felt that having a more of a medical and a safety responder was going to be helpful for that. And so again, it's very different, but similar in the sense that it's still around a empathetic, compassionate, and caring response to somebody versus versus triggering them potentially and then having them sent to jail. So that's going to be another one that we're working through as we're trying to make sure that that's a really good fit, and we're also very transparently, we're trying to also make sure that we are able to classify some of these positions. So if you're familiar with classifications, I won't get into the weeds on it, but they were allowed to then kind of have a longer longevity of these positions as they become classified and can continue past administrations. The last type of responder is we're going to call it our street outreach resource coordinator. And this will be a team who will go out. I know many of you have heard from family and communities. I think they call it public outreach team, Sebastian and Selena. And we've seen that their capacity is just not there to really be able to do that type of engagement with those who are experiencing homelessness. If anything, it's been somewhat agitating instead of actual de-escalating. And so what we're trying to do is build some capacity there, restructure it, and retrain so that we can really start to get out there and help with all the amazing other types of advocates and street outreach workers to really be able to build that response in a different way. So these are our 4 responders, and so our 4 different divisions. Wanted to kind of give you a brief deep dive, not too much of a deep dive, but a brief kind of overview of our trainings. And people are very interested about how is your trainings different than the police and the fire? It's very different. You can see here we're taking a much different trauma-informed approach, making sure that we talk about how to, about emotional intelligence, how to motivate, do motivational interviewing, how to disengage, right? Police train knowing that there's potentially a final, right? They have a weapon to be able to protect themselves at the end of the day, and they're probably wearing a vest. We don't have those. And so our disengagement and our tactical retreat is much different than a police officer would have, right? We are forced to really have to figure out how do we use our words and our body to get us out of situations. And so that's going to be really important for us to have. And more importantly, that we don't put ourselves in those situations. So, right, there's a lot of this that has a lot to do with that emotional intelligence, with that understanding triggers and how to communicate properly. You can see here there's symptoms of substance abuse and misuse, compassion fatigue, right? A lot of these jobs are in and out, right? The retention is so hard because people burn out so quickly. And so one of the things that we wanted to prepare for is that is trying to prevent that as much as we can. And so we really felt that having trainings around compassion fatigue and vicarious trauma was extreme, right? Self-compassion and self-care were extremely important. We've even started to look into a quiet room, where a space where people can have 15 minutes to themselves to really kind of come down from a stressful situation. We've also, even with our mobile crisis team, it's difficult to do, but for some of these situations that they've been in and where they're really being tested and sometimes triggered themselves, we've had to have the conversation. Do you need to take the morning tomorrow, right? Do you need to come down? Because what we don't want to do is inflict more trauma onto community because we haven't dealt with our own trauma. And so I think it's really important for us to have those conversations openly and with officers and firefighters, right? Because I think it's one of the things that sometimes they don't always take into mind is how that built up trauma can sometimes then prevent you from doing your job in the best way possible. So that's that. Just to kind of give you some logistical pieces, we have kind of decided, this is the type of calls that we've decided to take on our first year. Now, these will all be the lowest type of acuity. So on a scale from 1 to 5, the 1 being the most intense and dangerous, 5 being the least. So these will all be 4s and 5s, and these are the types of calls that we will be going out to in the first initial year. They will go through 911. It is something we felt very strongly about. I know a lot of cities have tried to do a new number or some sort of alternative way to get in connected. But what we're finding is that there's people who are really trying to avoid police altogether. And some of those situations are very dangerous. And we're not necessarily, right? It's definitely not a situation where I would feel comfortable sending anybody into without some sort of backup. So we definitely have decided to go through 911. They will qualify the call for safety and assess if there's a need to send an officer as well. And then that call will get sent to the fire department, in which they will actually be the dispatcher, which is kind of the lengthier piece of it, right? They stay on the call with you, they walk you through, make sure that the person on the phone call has that assistance the entire time and knows when we get to the scene. So these will be kind of our areas. So just wanted to kind of share that with you. And again, this is ever, constantly changing. We've never set baselines. We don't know where these will go. We have heat, things like heat maps where we know that there's high times of the day and the week that some of these calls get very, increased. So that'll help determine how we're going to set our times for the day. Additionally, we'd like to build enough capacity, and we think we should be there by the end of the year to try to be 24/7 so that we can really, really be out there in the field. But this alone is about almost anywhere between 3,500 to 4,000 calls a month, all in its own. And so that will allow us to give, an understanding on, is this what do we actually need to staff? What is our staffing analysis for the future? Are we making are we truly taking calls away from police so that they can start to really concentrate on some of these much more priority 1s and 2 kind of calls? Are we seeing faster call response? I mean, those are the kind of things that we're really hoping to measure to see if ACS is truly able to make that impact. Even the smallest ones will really help us understand where we can grow. Additionally, more stuff. And again, I'm so sorry. I added some slides that I thought, well, maybe not, but the more the merrier, I feel, when it comes to information, right? Information's power. So this will we'll have multiple ways to be dispatched. So although we will use a 911, we will also have 311 tickets, and those are for like your calls around encampments, your calls around needle pickups and abandoned vehicles. We have to start planning for 988. As many of you know, that is a national initiative that is mandated to be created by October 2022, I believe, or maybe it's earlier. And that will be a crisis line from a statewide perspective. And so we have to plan that when that gets implemented, we will be probably dispatched by 988 as well. Lastly, we'll have our own self-dispatch so that when we're walking down the street or out in the field and we see somebody who needs assistance, we should be able to stop, call into dispatch and say, we're going to stop at this location, just letting you know. And then again, we will probably, right? There's nothing that's going to stop people from calling. Once they start to know that we exist, I'm sure we'll get lots of direct calls in which we're have to ourselves triage, and if it's a 911, we'll have to send it back to 911. So that's kind of the way that we're going to be implementing from there. We may not get calls from 911, and we have to anticipate that those are things that we're going to have to test, see if it works, and if it doesn't, we'll make the changes as we need to. But there is no other than the Cahoots program, which is much smaller, and who we've worked with weekly for an 8-week process. Matt was involved in that. Our dispatchers were involved in that. We had multiple city levels, and we worked with Cahoots and multiple cities across the nation who are working on this. And no one has really solidified what a city third response looks like. Cahoots has figured out theirs, but again, they're a much smaller entity, and only takes a very small percentage of the calls from the Eugene Police Department. So theirs is a completely different model, and it works really well for them. But we're gonna have to do a little testing, and I think we've got some audience members from the national level who are waiting to see what that looks like, so that they could potentially replicate that going forward. Again, and I'll send you guys all, so this will be a lot of information. I don't want to overdo it, but this similar tells you how we're going to be sending people out. We were budget-wise, just so that you know, we were approved for FY22 for 7.73 million. So this will give us the capacity to be able to not only hire the types of responders we need for this initial year, but will also help us to have contractual funding to really bolster programs and nonprofits that we work with, so that we can really have true collaboration and good training and ways that we can start to bolster community in which we really wanted to do. Lastly, and I won't go into it because I'm taking a lot of time up, but this is kind of our tentative final year into next year's timeline, just from a very high level, lots of other pieces that are in here tactical, but this is kind of where we're at now and where we'll continue to move forward. So as you can see, August will be our training month. Every responders will have multiple trainings throughout the year, and there'll be some required right up front and others that will be required within 60 days and others that will be required within 80 days. And so and then there'll be retraining every year so that we're constantly staying up with the new trends when it comes to mental and behavioral health. So yeah, so we're expect that in September we will be full out in the community, making sure that we join those CPC meetings, that we're at neighborhood association meetings, that we're making friends with the owner of the 7-Eleven on Wyoming, right? That we get the calls from every single day because he's got situations. Like, that's the kind of stuff we're gonna be really focusing on as we get people out into the field. So look forward to seeing those responders. They will be visually, they will not be in a formal uniform like PD or AFR. They will be wearing a polo with our logo and a nice pair of pants, and so that they look like community members, and hopefully we'll be able to jive a little bit better with those who might be scared or fearful of traditional public safety departments. So I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
So not everybody knows about CAHOOTS. Could you break down the acronym?
Yes, let me find it before I butcher it, but yes, I'll put it in the chat. And it's a fantastic program, and the model is so great. But as we've learned, CAHOOTS itself has also had its trials and tribulations, and so we're just very thankful that we've been able to learn from some of that.
I typed it up so many times, I should know it, but I don't. So you don't know what the acronym stands for? Oh, there we go. Crisis Assistance, helping out on the streets. So yeah, I actually hit a radio program this morning with the police chief of Eugene, Oregon, talking about the program. And Eugene is a very different town. Eugene is a very different community. I think it's smaller, isn't it? It's
170,000 population.
Yeah.
With a very different population of individuals demographic wise. So doesn't have the same kind of historical trauma that New Mexico has and Albuquerque has experienced.
But you haven't completely walked away from it. You will be working on implementing some aspects of it, or do you think you'll just weave it into what you have?
No, the whole model has been woven into our ACS model. So not just them, but we've taken components from lots of different models that we've seen work really well. They don't have a co-responder model, that they're a very non-law enforcement team. However, we really did feel that having a highly experienced, highly educated, licensed clinician was extremely important on calls when it comes to police, right? They're able to create those certificate for evaluations. They speak the lingo of the hospitals. It's extremely important. And that's just not a model that they believe in, but for us, because of Albuquerque's issues and trauma, we have to have that super high acuity type of person. And so that is one of the areas where CAHOOTS is like, we don't do that model. And then additionally, I think they don't necessarily take as many calls as we're anticipating to take from our police. Theirs are very, very well qualified for a very kind of structured type of work. But the founders and the individuals that work there and all the directors, we chat probably if we went from a weekly sprint to now probably chatting every other week, and other cities across the nation who are same, but Portland, Oregon's also doing a city, a very specific third branch as well. Theirs is just a little bit different. We're also seeing the county here in Albuquerque. Bernalillo County has created a fire clinician model that they're trying to kind of get up and going. And so, you know, it's time for us to evolve. I think we've known this for a while. I think police know this, right? It's time for us to figure out how do we truly bring our expertise and really lend them to a better public safety model as a whole. And so we're very excited. We're one of the few cities nationwide that doesn't have the same kind of rub when it comes to police and fire. You know, we've had nothing but full support from both of our departments, our brother departments, whatever you want to call it. It's been great. We have not, and it's very difficult. I've been working with cities across the nation who that is the number one struggle, is that they just can't get aligned with their police departments. That they just won't do it. And that's a difficult task to, you know, do, because those calls have to be referred some way, right? You have to have police backup in situations when sometimes things can't be de-escalated. And it's a scary thing to believe that a police officer wouldn't come to your aid if you needed it, you know? And so we're very fortunate in Albuquerque that this type of new alternative response is being, hasn't been as big of a challenge when it comes to relationships.
Okay, actually your county equivalent was invited tonight, but she has commitments, so we will have her another night. And thank you for that cogent, wonderful presentation. Yes, your slideshow has grown and grown well. It has become a woman where it was once a child. We have a lot of questions and comments. I don't think I'm at the top of them, and I can't get up there. Oh yeah, I can. So I don't think we've addressed or answered any of them, though you did address one about what it would look like. Can anybody get to the top of the questions and comments, because I'm kind of broken down in one place here? Okay, no, we're good. So Mariela, you've answered about the budget. Would you say it was a generous budget? It's a generous amount of money?
You know, I think it is. It's definitely not as much as I think people were. And, you know, I know that there was lots of groups who were really wanting to see some like huge budget, but for startup in a government department, we're finding that this is actually a really good amount. It gives us enough that we can really truly spend it, right? Even if we got half of the police budget, I just don't think we realistically could have spent it and hired enough personnel in that quick amount of time. So I think that we're growing at the rate that from a business perspective is sustainable, and that it's not trying to grow too fast and then, you know, you peak and then you can hurt yourself in the long run. So yes, I felt that I was very happy with the amount that we were allocated.
There was also a question for Mr. Ehrig about the housing that's supplied to veterans. And I believe Mr. Ehrig answered that to satisfaction. If the person doesn't feel they did, please post again. Mike, I can never say your last name, Mike Kruchowski. There's a long question. In doing your outreach and assessments, it's more will you be working than do you work, because you're not quite hit the ground and running yet. Will you be working with the New Mexico Coalition to End Homelessness, which I believe is a single entry point for housing vouchers? I don't recall any mention of APD's social dispatch initiative. Is this still underway and in any way related to your work?
So I think that could be both me and Matt, but I think I'll be able to answer most of it. So yes, we have been in contact with the New Mexico Coalition to End Homelessness. They're not necessarily the single entry point for housing vouchers. We can get them in lots of other ways, and we have had discussions around how to get more vouchers. We also have had to be realistic about, we've had vouchers in the past and not locations that will accept vouchers, which is a challenge. And that becomes a whole other systemic issue around vouchers and housing. But yes, they are one of the many partners that we've connected with. And then the APD Social Dispatch Initiative is still it still sounds like they've been moving strongly. Matt, I don't know if you have any thoughts. We haven't quite connected with them yet, based on the fact that I think they haven't necessarily, I don't know where they've necessarily been. And I think I don't know if they've even been able to get people to go out and do follow-up yet.
Yeah, on the social dispatch end, it really has kind of stalled at, so an officer goes out, notices a person who is sleeping somewhere, doesn't wake them up, notes it, but what do you do with it? And it's been hard trying to find a partner to kind of take that on. Ideally, social dispatch will become essentially obsolete as ACS ramps up. So instead of that being a police call, it's now an ACS call long term. But we're not there yet. Someday, hopefully that's the goal.
Right now, there's lots of departments working on these things, and that's the hope, is that we've people have said, well, if you do a staffing analysis, how big will you be? And I said, well, it depends on what we're doing a staffing analysis for. Is it just for police, or transit's now asking us to be on the bus lines, right? Because we've seen issues on the buses. And so, and then senior affairs, I said, hey, can you come to these events? And hey, can, family and community, can you talk about, right, Parks and Rec? All of a sudden, the staffing analysis is not just the police department. The staffing analysis is the city of Albuquerque and all the many departments. And so that becomes a whole other, right? That's when we have to really start considering, where are we overlapping, and does it make sense to continue to grow ACS so that we can have that capacity to meet those demands?
I noticed in your budget that you have funds for vehicles. Are you going to be having a logo on the side, ACS? What are you thinking?
We are, and I totally didn't put a picture in there, but it's not going to be flashy. In some vehicles that we have, we will be, the ordinance for having your lights on the top will be needed, but it's only because that's the traffic ordinances, so that if we need to stop in the middle of the median or the side of the road, we can do that. But for most of our behavioral health responders, when they're out on the streets, it'll be a very basic white Honda hybrid. And it'll have like ACS community on the side, community safety department on the side, and a little logo that we've are testing. We're putting it out there to see how community partners. So maybe I'll send that over to you guys so you can tell me if you hate it or love it. And then that'll be it. We really felt that having simple cars where it's not really, flashy and doesn't create a lot of, rubbernecking on the road was a much better fit. Additionally, we did purchase a van. We loved the van idea for one, from the Cahoots model, and two, Denver used it as well, the STAR Center or STAR program. And so we thought, what a great idea. So we went ahead and purchased a van very similarly that we've now retrofitted to have the comfort of like what would be a single room where you could do case management, right? You could get somebody signed up for Medicaid in this space. You could pull them from the elements, right? Which tend to be sometimes what's the agitators. You've got so many people, so much going on. It's hot outside or it's cold outside. How do we start pulling people into a place where we can say, let's have a nice chat and we'll get you some water and food. And also, I see you're missing shoes. Let's get you a pair of shoes, right? So the van will be stocked with these types of products so that we can really help. One, it's not so that we can just start giving things out, but two, so that we can build that rapport and that we can help that person, survive a little bit longer without, the person who didn't have shoes, that we can get him those shoes or those pants to help them feel a little more human. in the long run. So we're very excited about the van, and we'll definitely be doing a ton of promotion, and we'll be at lots of events in the next couple months, really trying to get the word out that we're launching, or I have launched.
The program or the department, and this is true of the CIU as well, you're not necessarily limited to those who are not people who are experiencing homelessness. A call that comes from anywhere. And anybody who, you know, so you have housed people too with problems. And I know when I did the CIT training, that came up a lot. That actually it seemed to me that most of the people that the CISU were dealing with were not experiencing homelessness. Can you talk to that, Lieutenant Dietzel?
Yeah, no, sorry, Matt, didn't mean to jump in.
No, you're fine. And yeah, that is pretty much the vast majority of the cases are housed, whether it's, you know, some kind of supportive housing, or a lot of our clients actually live with parents, you know, as adults. It's actually very much a challenge to assist long-term with someone who is living on the streets, because they could be in one part of town today and another part of town tomorrow. And there are, you know, areas where people tend to congregate who are living on the streets and unhoused, but it's just very difficult. And one of the most successful things that we've found is getting people cell phones, so at least you can contact them. But the issue is, when you're, you know, you don't have a house, your stuff tends to move away from you, you know, when you're getting a shower or a rainstorm, or, you know, you went to the shelter and now you don't have your collection of goods. So it tends to be an issue across the board. That's one of the most challenging aspects of homeless outreach, is just finding people and finding them again later when you're trying to connect them into services.
So Mariela, your service is not specifically for those experiencing homelessness?
No, it's I think has been started to become a theme, which is, you know, sometimes difficult to break, but the reality is that ACS was originally created for, right, when the ACS was created, it was because George Floyd had been, right, murdered in plain sight, and the world was there to see it. And we and although he had, you know, some mental illness, the reality is that there was lots of other issues that were there. And so a lot of this, and I will, you know, be very transparent about it, is that a lot of this is also trying to stop with the over policing of neighborhoods who, because of the poverty and because of the history, right, tend to be our Black and brown neighborhoods. And it's because, right, and so then it just becomes a cycle that we tend to see. And so it's one of the things that we can't say that it's only mental health either. It's not just about mental and behavioral health. It's also about working with community and being able to truly understand, how do we truly do a public safety model that includes community, and that we're able to heal from the historical trauma that we've experienced. And again, it's not one, you know, it's historically, we've seen police departments get into this place, and it's those few bad apples that have created it, but it's enough that it's, you know, communities are fearful now. So we just have to be able to really meet the multi-level area and start to reimagine what public safety can be. And I'm not saying that at any point that says, you know, talking about the defunding of police. I appreciate, Mike, this, right, the funding was it's never been about defunding the police. The idea was about helping police, right? I can't expect, although Matt is fantastic, so I probably could expect Matt, but I could, you know, I have a multi-year degree in social work. So my lens is totally different than Matt's, and I could never do what Matt does. And so, you know, why are we been forcing that to happen? So yes, this isn't just about mental health. This isn't just about homelessness. This is about historical trauma that we've experienced, Latinos and African Americans, Asians, the whole gamut. We've got to start thinking about how race and equity plays into this all as well.
Yes, we are planning to have a meeting in the not too distant future about defining the term defunding the police, because that seems important and a lot of people don't get it right. Mr. Ehrig, does any of this resonate for you and the services that you offer? Does any of this relate to your organization?
Yeah, so I think we take all the same approaches. I don't have the budget that Mariela has, but you know, generally speaking, I think addressing, you know, homelessness, it's not like there's, I guess you wouldn't call them new concepts. There's a lot of old concepts that have been redesigned. But, you know, the overall theme is that it does take more than, you know, several folks to actually combat the issue of homelessness as a larger perspective.
And psychiatric impairment, neurodivergent, because not all of them, as we've established, are unhoused. A lot of people that have psychiatric issues live in houses, or as you said, Lieutenant Dietzel, live with their parents. So I'm trying to see if there are any more questions. I don't see any, but if you want to, if anybody wants to type one up, now's the time. We are.
Mariela, I'm wondering about psychiatry. I know, Matt, you said that the mobile crisis team has a full-time psychiatrist. Is that accurate?
So the psychiatrist is actually part of APD's crisis intervention section. But there is some clinical overlap there between clinicians we have in-house and the mobile crisis team clinicians. So you're not wrong.
Well, the question is around the issue of involuntary commitment and training that you have. I didn't notice anything in your training area about civil commitment. What's happening in that line? I've been in the field 40 years, so I'm just wondering, okay, you're going to have these situations come up. Do you have a psychiatrist you can call, and what's the process?
Thanks, Jacqueline. Yeah, so we have not, although we have hired a few licensed clinicians to work within ACS who will be able to do some of those behavioral health responders are LCSWs and LMSWs. And so although some of them will be able to write those certificate for evaluations, we are not trying to get into that field because we have the mobile crisis team and we will have access to some psychiatrists. We know that might be needed, but that's not necessarily the route we're trying to go. Alternatively, I don't want to get too much in the tweets, but we've also heard the other side of how additionally, as behavioral health workers, we too could be doing harm by forcing, right, that a hospital is just as bad as a prison when we talk about institutions. And so we decided not to necessarily hire like another slew of licensed clinicians to do certificate for evaluations, because the idea is that we do give people voluntary option, right? We will do voluntary transport, but if in the middle of that transport, someone says, I don't want to go to the hospital, I changed my mind, that's okay. We're going to stop the car. We're going to take them back to wherever we found them, and that'll be okay. And then again, I think the part that we're working out and what we're having to, and we don't necessarily know how often we'll find that, is that when does it now, right, from a social worker perspective, if somebody's potentially on the verge of hurting themselves or hurting somebody else, right, if you're suicidal or homicidal, then it does require an alternative, right? That's when we could bring in a mobile crisis team. And that's what we'll need to have to say, we're going to hang out here until we can get a team out, and then we'll just do a psych eval here and everything will, we'll work through this together. But I'll give you an example of a situation that happened the other day, and it's exactly why we're not trying to bring in police right away. But, we're starting to see more people who are willing to accept their mental health. And so we've had calls that have come in saying, I need a mobile crisis person. Can you please send somebody? And then we have, and the police gets there and they run plates and they find out they have felonies, and we don't address the mental health because we send them to jail right away. And that's what we're really, what we don't, and we also don't want to get into the place where they say, oh, can you send an ACS responder? And then we send them to the hospital. Because, right. So that's, I'm long version, and I'm sorry, it sounds like I'm rambling here, but I wanted to be clear that we don't want to, the whole idea is to be trauma informed. The whole idea is to allow them to have voluntary, right? They make the choice on their path to, being well.
Okay,
Yes, I think that's a great goal. Reality is sometimes
100%.
so what you're saying is then you refer to the mobile crisis team. That's not your role. Mobile crisis team takes over.
Yeah, totally. And that's where having them, right, on call to be able to really make those, to say, we're going to hang out here with you. And right, but in the background, we've had to call mobile crisis teams before. So we do it now too, where there's a situation where police officer gets to call and they're like, oh, this is they don't want to send, they don't want to arrest somebody either. So they call for a mobile crisis team. So I can assume, and I hope, is that we've got 8 mobile crisis teams across the city that include that are from the county as well. But I can see that where ACS and other types of alternative responses might need that backup for a higher acuity type of call, we'll need more co-response models.
there is a question here it's a comment and a question from a participant, from an attendee, and I'm going to read the whole thing. I've been following crime mapping calls responses around my neighborhood, and there are many incidents labeled as family dispute in the late night hours from the same address area. And I wonder, how can the police keep responding to those calls without some intervention coming into play, which is pretty much what we're talking about, but to sort of formalize how that would work. If there's a call at 2 o'clock in the morning, a family dispute, is there an ACS person available to go there?
I think that's where we're trying to build the capacity. I mean, I think we're going to probably, because of the way that we've seen heat maps, we're not going to be an 8 to 5. I'll tell you that much. The idea is to staff people according to where we see that there's a police need as well. But this is one of those situations, like a family dispute can really be the spectrum of a teenage girl fighting with her mom, or right, the husband and the wife in a very violent argument with guns. And I think that that's where some of those disputes, that's where dispatch, right? And we have very experienced 911 dispatchers will really be able to tell, is this a police at 2 a.m. in the morning? Or is this an ACS because it's a runaway daughter who's, pissed off because she didn't get to go to her boyfriend's house? Whatever, I think that's what we're having to figure out. And we have SOPs that we've been creating on, if let's say ACS does get to the house and it was qualified incorrectly, that is where that intuition, while you're approaching, realizing this is not the right call for me, right? I need somebody to go clear a scene, and vice versa. Our hope is that police get to a situation and realize, I do not need to be in this situation. You seem like you guys need a mediator. Let me bring in ACS, and hopefully we can interchange like that. But it'll take some time for us to get into a groove.
Lieutenant Dietzel, correct me if I'm wrong, and I might be, the minute that there's a dispatch to a family dispute and anything of that nature, the police are automatically engaged?
Yeah, we have to be very, very careful with family fights, month after month, year after year, in terms of the calls that are most likely to result in a use of force by a police officer. It's DV, it's domestic violence across the board every time. These are heightened situations. There is usually a criminal element there, not the low level stuff, but husband, wife, the criminal element's usually there. We could make an arrest. We don't always, depends on the situation. But family fights, you'll notice that wasn't on the original list of call types. And that's because this is maybe a decade down the road for ACS, that kind of time frame, because you're going to need so much training and kind of at the dispatch level. It's not an ACS issue. They can probably handle some of it, but it's at the dispatch level where if you get that wrong, and it could be tragic for everybody. So that's why DV is a very sensitive topic for police. But there is room there. So, you know, that kind of APD goes out, recognizes this is a low level call on the family fighting end of it, and calls ACS in. And I think that's the best way to start kind of easing into that situation. That'll give everybody time to get used to it and kind of make this the new normal for those very low level family calls.
I actually meant the kind of call that could be a typical ACS call, that could be something that could be diverted to ACS. Once it's diverted to ACS, can APD step back and say this is their deal, not ours? Or are you still engaged because there was a dispatch call to begin with?
So ideally you would be able to, and we have this set up with the fire mobile crisis team that Mariela was talking about. So APD goes out, make sure the scene is safe enough, realizes they don't have to be there, calls in the fire mobile crisis team, hands the call over, like physically, this is yours now, and says bye and leaves. And so that's the goal for a lot of these calls, especially the ones that are iffy on the dispatch end, because anyone who's sat at the 911 call center knows what you get isn't everything. And so you're gonna miss that nuance of, you know, this person is at a higher level now than when the call was made, or they've calmed down a little bit and then they ramp up again. And so that's why dispatch is so key and vital in all of this, because you want to start out easy, take the easy ones, and leave those murky ones for a scene security by a police officer first, and then we'll hand it off.
It's
And I
kind
see that.
of the issue of Henry Hyde, isn't it? Because there just two officers went very casually to the door because they thought he'd calmed down and it was over to a point, and they could just pick him up and bring him to the station. Anybody that doesn't know the Henry Hyde case, they were killed. They were shot by Mr. Hyde. I have the name, right?
John Hyde.
John Hyde. Well, I always get names wrong somewhere. That is a somewhat typical example, maybe, of a relaxed approach that you've learned from. I mean, an ACS would, well, I guess, you know, no, an ACS would never be called something like that because he'd had a very busy day.
Yeah, no, and a 2 a.m. disturbance call like that is probably highly probable it's a dangerous situation. Now, one of the calls that you'll see on there is message for delivery, and that is one of those that we tend to get from a court right when the perpetrator has been released, or they have a certain many hours to be, right? They're saying we're going to release them in 7 hours. Then we have thought that we could take those calls. It's when you go and let the victim know, hey, your perp is being released, want to let you know. They're going to head home probably, you know, and a lot of times we know that a lot of victims won't leave. So I think, you know, ACS could really help with that conversation, assuming that individual is not there, to say, okay, that's your choice, but do you have a safety plan? Do you have an extra phone? Do you have an extra pair of keys? Do you have a bag in case you needed to leave quickly? Do you have a support system? And those are the kinds of calls that we're really looking for. A lot of this is preventative work and follow-up, where we just know that officers are just capped. I mean, it's a lot of work, and they still continue to do it. Like, I've seen them just be like everything, and it's always amazing to have that experience, but it's exhausting. And in our time frame, and especially under the Department of Justice, it can make it very complicated really fast. So we just want to be able to support and help community start to get back to a place where they can really feel supported from multiple angles.
Mr. Ehrig, does your organization experience late night crisis calls that you need to deal with, or do you divert them if there are some to APD?
So we do, ma'am, because we have transitional housing. We actually also have 24-hour resident monitors who also are peer support trained. And we also generally have a case manager with advanced training that's on call 24 hours a day. It's not a daily thing for us, but it is a common occurrence. And the one thing that we do specifically is all our staff are trained in multiple modalities of I guess, dealing with crisis or, intervention strategies in order to ensure, hopefully, that we don't have to take them to a hospital or other kind of facility.
Would you call in the crisis? Would you want the CISU called in, crisis intervention unit? Would you want them called in? Would you?
So we have actually called CIT several times because again, there's only so much we can do using trauma-informed care and a harm reduction model. When some folks get to that level of what I'll call anxiety or mania, our staff are not allowed to put hands on anyone. And, it's just some situations require, law enforcement assistance or with Mariela's folks starting to come on board, their assistance because of our stipulations as far as how we provide service.
So you would also turn to ACS when it's up and running for certain situations?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I'm a strong proponent in using services and supports out there in the community. To me, it really doesn't matter, if it's a government agency, a city government agency doing it, or if it's another organization that's empowered to do those things. I think, again, the combination of using law enforcement when necessary, but also using people trained to deal with crisis in a different way is highly beneficial.
Okay. Well, thank you. We are at 7:25. I mean, I don't see any other questions on our chat. And so thank you very much, Mr. Ehrig. Thank you, Mariela. Thank you, Lieutenant Dietzel. We're going to go into area command concerns, so you are free to leave or stick around and listen to them. It's entirely your call. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Very informative. Appreciate it.
Sounds very, very optimistic. The fact you're working with the police, the police are working with you. I'm excited.
Yes, it's exciting. So now, I don't see, Laura, you want to start in with your crime report for the month?
Sure. Hi, everybody. I'm Laura Trujillo, the Valley Crime Prevention Specialist, and I have the property crimes for the entire Valley Area Command from 6/15 to 7/15. There were 17 commercial burglaries, 18 residential burglaries, 42 vehicle burglaries, 77 auto thefts, 43 recovered vehicles, 3 robberies, which were carjackings, 9 commercial robberies, and 2 robberies by gunpoint.
I guess I'm going to ask the question I always ask. Are there any specific areas in the command area that get hit harder than others?
Can one of the lieutenants take that up? Do you have that answer?
Lieutenant Napoleon or?
I'll actually speak to that.
I didn't run the hot spots for that. So
No, it's okay. I'll actually. So what we're seeing actually citywide is we're finding that a lot of the hotel apartment complexes and hotels are spots to where the hotels are really kind of where they're dropping these vehicles off. So we get a lot of recovered stolen vehicles from the hotels. But we also are seeing that a lot of stolen vehicles are coming from apartment complexes. And that's not just here in the area command, that's citywide. So that obviously is an issue that we discussed that in depth on Wednesday on how we're going to address that. One thing that we're doing here in the Valley Area Command is we have put in, actually called in an auto theft so they can deploy the vast majority of their bait cars in the area. And we're seeing week by week, it's trending down week by week. We think that's a good measure to take. But another thing that we did is I get those hot spots in my email. So I send those down to Lieutenant Napoleon. I sent that down to Lieutenant Sanchez, and then also my swing shift lieutenant. One thing that we always see, or that is usually a common occurrence with stolen vehicles, is that's a nighttime, early morning type of crime. So I've given those hot spots to my lieutenants. They've went ahead and filtered that down to the officers. And when the officers aren't taking calls, then they're going to be in those areas either conducting proactive work, or, you know, once they've accumulated enough calls to where they have several reports that they have to write, they'll go in those areas, provide that presence, and then hopefully, you know, catch an in-progress crime.
Are there any hot spots for burglaries and robberies, or are there any areas in the command area that get hit harder than others?
No, not right now. Nothing that we're seeing in the heat map. You know, obviously commercial burglaries occur at night, residential burglaries occur during the day. But they're really more of just, I guess, not specific areas. They're just really a lot of those are crimes of opportunity. People making themselves or their vehicles or their homes a relatively easy target. So we always try to preach target hardening when it comes to those types of things. But there's nothing really in the area command to where we go, hey, you know, we are seeing this, you know, just east of the river, you know, along Central. Nothing like that.
Okay. It never occurred to me that, of course, commercial night, residential day.
Yeah. So you know the reason, right? Yeah. So the reasons are because, right, people work during the day, and people, you know, criminals know that, so they can do it without getting caught. And then commercial, right, 9 times out of 10 those are closed during graveyard hours, so that's when, like I said, the crimes of opportunity.
Okay. Yes, I know. Laura knows this. I left my car door unlocked one night. And
I was at Costco last week and parked next to a car, and both doors unlocked, and I actually opened the car. I was like, oh, look, that's unlocked. I'll lock it for them. I hope your keys weren't in there, but at least it's not going to get broken into.
Well, I don't know.
Lock your doors. That's why they're there. Lock your doors.
Yeah.
And don't leave anything in the vehicles at all.
Yeah. Purses, cell phones. It's all common sense, guy. Everybody here knows this. Everybody's shaking their head yes. It's just, and I get it. It's easy sometimes to forget, or people get complacent because they've never had their car broken into. But just remember that they are crimes of opportunity. So don't provide that opportunity to a person.
And another thing I tell people is put your valuables in the trunk before you go to your destination. Because if you have a laptop in your back seat and then you go to the store and you put your laptop in the trunk, there's people watching for that kind of stuff. So as soon as you walk away, they're going to break into your vehicle.
It's awful to think of that. Is there anything else in the area command that we should be particularly concerned about, as goes, I suppose, for want of a better word, criminal activity?
Right. You know, like our biggest uptick in citywide has been in auto theft. So we're really trying to attack that aggressively. And the reason being is we believe auto theft to be a precursor to violent crimes and other property crimes. You know, people steal a car to go break into a house, or they steal a car, dump it in a parking lot so they can steal another car, or steal a car to go do some sort of narcotics transaction, steal a car to go do an armed robbery. So that's why we're trying to really attack that aggressively. The next step obviously is to hopefully us and the district attorney's office can get on the same page, and they can kind of understand that, hey, listen, we need to prosecute these aggressively, because as it stands right now, you know, receiving and transferring a stolen motor vehicle is a 4th-degree felony, and then 9 times out of 10 it gets pled down to a misdemeanor. So there's 0 jail time unless we actually catch the person in the stolen car and can prove. We also have to be able to articulate for the case to move forward. You know, it's not just being in a stolen car. The officer has to be able to prove, or at least have enough probable cause to show that the person who was driving that car knew it to be stolen. Because the first thing we're going to get out is, I didn't know it was stolen. I borrowed it from my friend. You know, so it's incumbent upon that officer to you know, write a really good detailed complaint and report so that case can move forward.
Yeah, how can you get around that? He says, I didn't know it was stolen, and I'm borrowing it from my friend.
You know, it's really all about officers being able to do a thorough investigation and state facts, and state facts in that report that a reasonable person would believe that the vehicle they're driving with a screwdriver or a messed up steering column would believe that vehicle is stolen. So and also hopefully trying to get a good interview, right? Obviously can't make people talk to us, but you know, people who are maybe, you know, savvy in talking to people and have good communication skills and do the right things in terms of reading their rights per Miranda and seeing if they want to talk. You know, that's a skill that officers have to learn and hone. It's a tough skill. It really is.
Is it equal opportunity car theft now? I remember at one time that particular makes and models.
Yeah, there's definitely always, you know, a particular make that they like to steal, you know, whether it is because that's what kind of is hot on the market down in Mexico for those types of things, because that's where a lot of these vehicles go. If it's, you know, if they're trying to, like, you know, sell these vehicles. But usually, you know, it was Hyundais a while ago, Kias, things like that. I don't have that list with me right now, but I can definitely reach out to the commander of our investigative services division, who's oversees auto theft, and they can tell us which vehicles they're seeing are stolen the most. I would just need kind of maybe a reminder email from you, Rowan, so I can have that at the next meeting if that's what you want.
Yes. Speaking of automobiles, I lived in a very quiet block. I've heard next to nothing at night. And all this week, I've heard cars peeling off the streets, speeding. Right. And I know that we had a resident of the area write to us and complain about what was going on with him.
Yes, Sydney.
Mr. Rawdon.
Yes.
Yeah, I was hoping he'd be here tonight so he could talk about it directly, but I don't.
Yeah, you know, I emailed him back and gave him my phone number. He hasn't called me back yet.
Okay, because I guess they're coming further down Central now, because I mean, I stay up pretty late and I was hearing it at 2 o'clock in the morning.
Right.
This roaring, and so I guess there needs to be, now that it's affecting me, I'd like to see tighter control. Sure. If it was affecting other people, no. I was really surprised that I started hearing it, and it's been this week. So I'm just wondering if the cars are moving further down.
Well, I mean, there's always the cruising on Central. So I don't know. Well, actually, I have an idea where you live because you told me, but really it's between, you know, 1st and 8th, you know, and then they're taking off more towards West Central, towards the river. So that's kind of what we're seeing.
But I'm 4 blocks up from Central, so I was just surprised to hear it being that loud.
Yeah.
It literally sounded like he was outside my door. It was so loud. But that's not anything to go by because the noise carries. Is there anything else that anybody wants to bring up? I don't see anything here that anybody wants to
Commander Norris, I haven't met you before, and I was just wondering if you were with the Valley before, or if you were in another area of Albuquerque, and what you've noticed, if you were in a different area, what you have experienced in the Valley that might be different from other areas of the city.
So I'm replacing who was Commander Brown. He's now Deputy Chief Brown. So I'm his replacement. Before this, I was in the Investigative Services Division. So I wasn't in a particular area. The division that I oversaw covered the entire city. We didn't have particular area. The Valley was never really an area that stuck out to us as having specific problems relative to the types of crimes that my detectives investigated. There was nothing, like, oh man, we get a lot of stolen vehicles in the Valley, or there's a lot of dope dealing in the Valley, or there's a lot of violent crime in the Valley. It was really nothing that we saw that made the Valley stick out with any of those types of things. Obviously, I think crime is pervasive throughout the city. In other areas of the city, right, it's more prevalent, right, than in other areas of the city. For instance, like the International District, or sometimes the Southwest Area Command, the Northeast, and there's pockets, right, of those area commands where we see the highest levels of crime. But as far as the Valley goes, where I was prior to this, we didn't see anything that made the Valley stick out. Now, before I was a commander, I was lieutenant in violent crime, so I was over homicide, sex crimes. I was over stalking, armed robbery, officer-involved shooting teams, things like that. And again, we didn't see anything that made the Valley stick out. Sometimes the Valley would stick out because we would have a lot of sexual assaults, like rapes, where people would come to the Family Advocacy Center and report it at the Family Advocacy Center, right? So that kind of gets chalked up to something occurring in the Valley, when in all reality, it occurred somewhere else. I will say this, we are seeing an uptick in sexual assaults, rapes around the city. And we think that we can kind of draw a direct line to the city back opening up, people being out in public, people making questionable decisions when they come out of bars with people, and doing things like that. So, but nothing in the Valley particularly.
But you were also with the Northwest. You were a lieutenant.
Yeah, so I was a field lieutenant in the Northwest Area Command before I was a lieutenant in violent crime. So I was out in up in the Northwest for about 2 years as a field lieutenant.
Thank you. And
Sure.
thank you. And welcome to the Valley.
Thanks. I'm anxious to be here. Happy to be here.
Commander Norris.
Did you have a
welcome as
question?
well. Oh, I'm sorry.
Go ahead, sir.
One thing you had said is very interesting to me, that the Valley, nothing you experienced made the Valley stick out as a high crime area necessarily. And that's interesting to me, because I get the feeling that the public perception in Albuquerque is that downtown is a high crime area. And it hurts the development of downtown, that perception. And you seem to have a different experience. And that's interesting to me. And I'm happy to hear it. But we have to work on that and get it out there that maybe downtown isn't such a violent or crime area.
And we're taking those measures. We're taking measures to maybe change that perception. I mean, don't get me wrong, there are issues downtown, right? I mean, we all know this. There are issues, and a lot of those issues with downtown, it's what happens downtown is you have people that it's not necessarily the residents of the Valley Area Command that are causing these issues, right? You have with downtown, especially bar closing, you have residents from all over the city that come downtown, they start drinking, they start doing stupid stuff in the bars, they come out of the bars, you know, where their judgment is extremely compromised, and then those types of crimes are committed, right? So not necessarily by Valley residents, and I know that's not what you're alluding to or what you're asking, but it's that's what makes downtown so challenging, is because you have so many individuals coming from all over the city that are choosing to spend their time there and maybe make some bad decisions. Now, there are issues downtown. I'm not going to deny it. I'm not going to try to candy coat it, but that perception, I think, is you know, that it's worse than it actually is. You know, and the types of issues that we have downtown are quality of life types of crimes. You know what I mean? Homelessness, you know, street racing, things like that. Bar closing. I mean, Lieutenant Sanchez, I'm not going to ask him to, but I'm sure that he could probably take up a full 2 hours about some of the issues that we have going on downtown after bar closing. But we have an aggressive operational plan going on that Lieutenant Sanchez has done a great job of leading. We're dumping a lot of resources into bar closing downtown. We're bringing in our special operations division to help us out with manning to provide that overwhelming presence down there and take strict enforcement action. But just as deterrence to just, you know, we want people to go down there. We want people to have a good time. But once the bars close, you have to leave. Go. You don't need to be down here anymore.
You don't have to go home, just don't stay here.
Exactly. So one thing that we've done is for this upcoming field services bid, and Rowan and Edwina, please excuse, you've already heard this, so please excuse the redundancy. But for our field services bid, we increased our manning on our graveyard shifts to where we're going to have more manning than we currently have, more staffing on the weekends. So before, the original schedule was like 1 or 2 squads. We're actually going to have up to 3 to 4 squads working downtown. Well, not downtown, but at least graveyards where we'll have that manning downtown to make sure that we do provide presence.
Fantastic. Great to hear.
Well, welcome. We're pleased to have you.
I'm glad to be here.
Edwina, did you have a question? I thought you were going to speak earlier.
It was answered. I just wanted to ask Commander Norris to introduce himself. So.
Oh, yes.
Yes.
Are there any other questions?
Oh, I wanted to ask about the shot spotter program.
Mm-hmm.
Well, specifically for the Valley, is there an area that stands out?
Usually South Broadway areas and as of late, maybe during bar closing, we have been getting some shots fired downtown around bar closing, but usually the South Broadway area, maybe just kind of when I say South Broadway, usually between like Gibson and Lomas, east and a little bit west of Broadway. But that's where we're experiencing a lot of them. We have an 8:45 meeting every morning to discuss any shootings that occurred citywide, and also to discuss any shot spotter. And actually, it's been really quiet this week. It's been very quiet this week. I have an app on my phone that lets me know if there's a shot fired in the Valley Area Command within that coverage area. It's actually been pretty slow this week with regards to any shots fired.
Good. Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
And people in my neighborhood have complained about shots over the months, hearing them.
Mm-hmm.
The Downtown Neighborhoods Association.
Right.
Runs from 6, well, this area where they've been hearing the shots runs from 6 to, say, 14th.
Yeah.
And they've been hearing shots intermittently, and it's worried them, but I guess it's not been that significant. Jeez. Sorry, there was a big thump.
Okay.
And Rowan, if you can remind them to continue calling those in, don't just count on the shot spotter for that, because we still need the input from the community to help out.
Yeah, I do often remind people to call things in, and they
Is
don't.
that a 911 call? We think we hear a shots fired, call 911?
No, I would call 242 cops on that unless you hear something subsequent to the shot leading you to believe that, you know, somebody's been hit or there's an injury. 9 times out of 10 when we do have shots fired, and there is, not 9 times out of 10, but oftentimes, and somebody's hit, you know, we get that call relatively quickly, and that'll come in as a priority 1 call. But if it's just shots down from a distance, that would more be a 242 cops call.
Does ShotSpotter cover the entire city? There
No,
are enough devices that wherever
No.
there's a shot fired, it's picked up?
it doesn't cover the entire city. We have ShotSpotter in every area command, but it doesn't cover the entire city.
Okay.
Is there anything else? Lieutenant Napoleon and Lieutenant Sanchez, we're sorry not to hear from you tonight, but thank you for being there. You've been sort of, are you going to speak?
Oh, no, I was just going to say, I think Commander Norris was answering all the questions that I previously have normally stepped in to answer. So I think he got everything covered.
Yeah, they've worked hard enough this bit. I'm going to give them a break.
Thanks always for having us, Miss Rowan.
My pleasure. Always my pleasure. Well, if there's nothing else, I suppose we'll call the meeting a bit early.
It was
So,
a pleasure meeting everybody. I will see you next month, and look forward to speaking to you again.
Thank you.
next month's conversation, next month's meeting will be with Shaun Willoughby, and perhaps also Mr. Zach Smith, who has a blog with an opposing point of view about crime matters. So we're looking into it. So thank you so much, and good night.
Good night.
One
Night.
question, Rowan. Were we supposed to approve the minutes from last month?
They're posted on the. We're not strictly Roberts. So we don't necessarily need to. The minutes are posted on the website, so you can look them over. And I will work harder on that. I should send them around. I do apologize, but we don't have a motion to approve the minutes during the meeting. We can approve them beforehand because we're not bound by Roberts.
Right.
But I will work on that. I do apologize.
Okay. Have a nice evening.
Bye-bye.